Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Gene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs. My name is Justin Lake, and I'll be your host for today's episode of the Frontline Innovators podcast. Today's guest brings energy and passion to drive business results in her organization. She was the recipient of PepsiCo's 2019 Chairman Award and is currently the manager of the Future Ready Workforce at PepsiCo. Please welcome Cristina Rivera. Hello, Cristina.
Hello, Justin.
I'm really excited to have you on the podcast today, and really excited to get into your background and how you ended up in this role. But before we do that, I want to start the conversation as we always do and ask you what you think is the greatest challenge facing the deskless frontline workforce today.
Yeah, great question. I'm excited to be here. So first of all, thanks for having me. I think the biggest challenge for the deskless workforce today, I could say COVID, period, and move on, but we're going to put that aside because everybody could say that.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that later too. So,
okay, good. But I think the challenge is like the speed of change in skills. Just to kind of say it like plainly. If you like buzzword bingo, you can say digitization of the workforce, if you could actually say it, like I can't.
Right.
But it's really like how things are continuously changing and more techy. And it's really leaving behind people who aren't able or prepped to learn those skills. And I think there's like multiple generations, multiple demographics making up the front line. Those of us who like drive change in that organization have to figure out a way to set up systems to help them kind of leapfrog and keep up with that pace. Because I don't think any of us can keep up with it, but like we've got to figure out a way to help accelerate that skill development.
That's a fantastic start. What you just talked about is really the central theme of what Frontline Innovators is really about. And when you talk about leaving people behind who aren't prepared, I very much appreciate that you mentioned that it's multiple generations. There seems to be a bit of a myth that it only affects the older generation, the folks that are nearing aging out of their roles for one reason or another. And we've had a lot of guests on the show to help debunk that myth. And I've witnessed firsthand that sometimes it's young folks that are coming into these jobs that, aren't computer science majors, but, they're finding themselves now with a lot of tech engagement burden on their job, and they're not necessarily comfortable about it. So it's interesting to hear you talk about the age piece. Do you think that all of your colleagues throughout the organization recognize that it's a multi-generational challenge, or do you think that maybe that myth still persists inside your organization a bit?
Oh, no, nobody. People, I think pockets in HR realize that, but I believe that because work holistically is changing so much, unless you're deep in it, unless you're deep in understanding the future of work, deep in one part of the organization. Okay, IT, yes, maybe everybody's going to have to know Python in the future. But did you know that maybe half of your finance people might have to know it? Like, is that really something that somebody who isn't supporting that group would really know? No, they're like finance people know numbers, spreadsheets, Excel, whatever it is. And so absolutely, no, people don't know that, which is just another thing that we have to help accelerate getting people on board.
Yeah. Okay. I have a bunch of questions I want to ask to go dig into that, but for my sake and for that of the audience, I'd really like you to give us a little bit of your background so we can get to know you and how you ended up in this role that you have today. So give you some flexibility to kind of go back into your past as far as you'd like to go. But if you want to include education as a background, but how did you end up where you're at today doing the things you're doing?
Yeah, well, I like to share my story, so tell me if I get too long.
No,
Because
you just keep on
it's
going. We want to hear it.
yeah, yeah, it's not linear. And so I think it's really helpful for people who think that, they have to go, one, two, three. I'm going A to Z by adding five and green, like it's my undergrad's in psychology, with a minor in outdoor education. I'll tell you, my major was actually outdoor education until I looked around and realized all of my peers wanted to go live in the Alps or lead ropes courses or, go lead, some sort of expedition or campgrounds. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm good.
So
Um,
there's a degree in outdoor education.
there is a degree in outdoor education at Texas A&M University.
That's
Um,
fascinating.
Whoop. Yeah, and it was awesome. But I realized this is like a hobby. I mean, I was leading corporate groups as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old through high ropes courses, having people jump off a 30-foot pole, grown men. It was really empowering and awesome, which leads to, life and talent management and HR. But it was obvious that I wasn't going to be being a camp counselor in my
Right.
life. So anyway, I realized that I switched my majors. I became a psych major. My last course in college, when I was ready to be out of there, was IO psychology. Do you know what IO psychology is?
I don't.
IO stands for Industrial Organizational Psychology, and it's super geeky, and a lot of people have never heard of it. But what it really is psych in the workplace. And I fell in love with it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I should do. This is HR basically. But it was my last year, my last course, and I was like, I'm out of here. And so I didn't go to more school. In another world, another life, maybe I would have gotten a master's, PhD, done something else. I have lots of friends who are IO PhDs, honestly, in my current job and other jobs. But yeah, I was done with school at that point. So um, shocker, there's not a lot of jobs when I graduated for bachelor's of psychology roles. So I temped. And I like to tell that to people because I had a bachelor's degree in a booming economy and I couldn't get a job because it was a generic bachelor's degree. So I temped and I learned a bunch of random things. I was a receptionist. I worked at a home loans and actually got a job at a home loan place for a while and did loans and I was an assistant. And then they moved me because they were like, well, you're smart. And so I got other jobs there. And then after a while, I did a little bit of HR-ish stuff. And I was like, yeah, that's actually what I want to do. So I started applying for jobs and I landed my first HR generalist role at a consulting firm.
That's
So
perfect.
yeah, but I mean, that was a couple years later. So it's not like I was graduated school and I was in HR. And I like to tell people that start because I know kids now that graduate college and are like, I don't have a job, my life is over. And I'm like, not really. Um, so yeah,
Would
oh, go ahead.
I'd like to understand, did you know what you wanted to do in HR when you left with that degree, or was part of the problem that you weren't exactly sure what to target?
Yeah, no, I had no idea. I just
Okay.
thought that psychology in the workforce, that one course was super interesting to me, and something like that would actually be probably fun to work in. That's honestly all I knew. And I knew that my minor, outdoor education, I really enjoyed leading people through team building and ropes courses. So how can those two things be a job? I didn't know. How does a 22-year-old know anything? Honestly, they don't.
I thought I knew everything at 22. It just turns
Um,
out I was totally wrong.
Yeah, I have a 18-year-old and they don't know anything at that age, trust me. Um, yeah, so um, I loved that job. Once I got the HR generalist job, I loved it. And I'll tell you, some people who are like HR generalists, kind of at the bottom of the totem pole,
Hmm.
they wouldn't say they love their job. It's paperwork, it's filing, it's scheduling interviews, it's doing kind of the beginning of onboarding. But it was so fun. I got to learn so much. And I think that's probably what tells you that I'm actually probably like in the right field or in the right, I'm meeting my calling, because I'm helping people. Um, so after that, I actually moved to a software company. I'll tell you why. Random story.
Yeah.
My boss at the time said, "You shouldn't be in HR. You're a driver. You like to get things done. You can do so much more. HR is always taking people's orders, and we're always the first to get cut in layoffs."
Wow. That's a big statement for somebody from HR to say about HR.
Yeah, it's HR. I think like director or VP or something said that to me, and I was like, "Well, crap. Okay, so I better go do something else." So I went and worked at a software company. I was in operations. I did all sorts of things over there, and led a multi global team, multinational team over there, and it was HR software, but I was in a software company, so I learned all about software and all that stuff. As I was going through that company, I realized I wasn't loving my job.
Hmm.
And so I quit. um, I took a contract job in HR because I was like, I want to be back in HR. I think I would like this. So I took a contract job. I was a director and I took like a analyst role at PepsiCo to get back into HR because I'd heard a lot of good things about the HR organization here, and the gamble paid off because they hired me full time, and I haven't looked back. I've done all sorts of things from goodness gracious, rolling out global technologies, culture shifts, career models, all sorts of, you know, projects within this company, lots of training and development. And, my first role I actually got to buy steel toe boots. And I still have them in the closet because anytime I go to a plant, I get to wear them and people think I'm crazy, but I'm like, well, I'd rather have my own than borrow some that are stinky and who knows whose feet have been in them.
That we have, I've got a pair of steel toe boots here in the office for the same reason, because when we do site visits, I want to make sure that, there's a good pair of shoes around.
Heck yeah, heck yeah. So yeah, so my story led me to kind of where I am now. Is the moral of where I am now is that I speak up and I go after projects and I go after work. So I chase work. So I've not always been, let's say, promoted or gone after promotions because I chase exciting work. And oftentimes I see an opportunity and I speak up about it, so then that I get rewarded, quote unquote, with more work. So that leads me to kind of where I am now, or where I've been in the last few years. Is I've been kind of an agent of change. I'm in change management. I am a change manager. I don't know what I am, but that's because I've gotten to roll out huge, technology across our entire global organization. I've gotten to roll out our new culture shifts across the entire organization. I'm in the process of changing us to be more skills based. And so all those things are change management things. And I landed here because I spoke up.
That's fantastic. I want to circle back around to your experience with the men and women on the front lines. And I asked you about, at the beginning, what you think is the biggest challenge facing, the frontline workforce. And right, we talked a little bit about the speed of change in skills and leaving behind those folks who aren't prepped to learn those skills. When we flip the view around a little bit and we have conversations with the men and women on the front lines, what do you think they would describe as the biggest challenge? Would they say the same thing, or would they have a different perspective about that challenge from their viewpoint?
If we told them the speed of change,
No, if we were
just
asking them
if we said what's their biggest.
what they think is the biggest challenge, not what you think is their biggest challenge, but what do they think is their biggest challenge?
I think that would not be their answer. I think their answer would probably say overworked, um, too much, we always want more efficiency, more, crunching the numbers, more to do with less people, kind of those types of things, which again, to me, relates in my world to skill building. Like, how are we digitizing and making things, quote unquote, more efficient with technology? And then are we training and elevating the skills of our frontline in order to support those? so that they don't feel like we're just saying, do the exact same thing you've been doing, but 3 times more because I got rid of 2 of your colleagues.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that comes up a lot on this podcast, and just in our conversations in my normal work during the day, which is um that the implementation of new technology makes many frontline workers anxious about the potential for it to replace them. And that to me feels like one of the big differences between implementing technology in other areas of corporate America or the global economy, in that, the accounting team typically doesn't feel as threatened, I don't believe, by a new implementation of SAP or Oracle as the frontline workforce may feel about a new implementation of technology for the front lines. Do you think there's any validity to that?
Oh, absolutely. I would have said, like, I was the answer of, you know, what's my biggest challenge? And it is more work, more efficiency. But
Yeah.
secondly, it's you're trying to replace me with a robot.
Yeah.
Like we definitely hear that. And I would say that's, they think they would feel like that's their biggest challenge. And so absolutely, anytime we want to roll out something with the intent to make their lives easier, that with the intent to make things smoother or more effective, the fear comes in. And I think that fear is one of the biggest things that people who are in charge of change management and any culture shift in an organization, those human elements are the pieces that we have to um, attend to the most, because that's what is changing much more than my behaviors and me pushing whatever buttons.
Right. Well, and I've been a part of a lot of the conversations in organizations that were implementing new digital solutions for the front lines, and rarely has the motivation behind those investments been to eliminate a portion of the workforce. And it often has been geared toward more efficiency, greater output, greater results, things like that. But in almost every case that I can think of, their jobs actually were not in danger. But I wonder sometimes if we're doing a good enough job of communicating that to the people that feel that they could be affected by that. Have
Yeah.
you figured out any good way to handle that communication to alleviate those concerns? Because I mean, adoption of technology is going to be very difficult if the people are threatened by the very technology you're asking them to learn.
I wouldn't say no, I'm not an expert and there is no silver bullet. There are some things that I've done and have been doing recently that are much more about like, what's your future look like? And very focused on how can we, where are you headed? And very much about me as an employee, me as my future job, really focused on what is this going to look like for me in 3 years or in, whatever. So that we can make it real to them that, oh, it's going to actually look like, there's going to be a robot there next to me, but I'm going to have to be on the screen making sure that the pressure is right or the blah 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 is right. And so that's what it is, and so then they can start conceptualizing the changes in the factories, and in the everywhere, so they can then place themselves there. And ideally, in my goals, they can start thinking, okay, what skills do I need to grow to get there?
Yeah. So that was the next question I was going to ask is when we do create that future vision for that employee about what it will look like at that time, then clearly a skills gap will be identified. Right. And so that's where we do need to look at, reskilling or upskilling those workers to help fulfill that vision for them.
Yeah, but it is really tricky because I mean, there are places where things are moving and, maybe we're building a different facility and maybe it's right by that one, but it's, that one's going to move and this one's going to come over here. Or, I mean, I don't know I can't tell our future, but,
Mm.
companies are doing that.
Yeah.
And so, like, how do you say that? Like, those roles are changing. Nobody's trying to get rid of your job. Like my job, I tell people that all the time. I'm always worried. I'm like, PepsiCo used to lay people off all the time. Like, I'm always prepared to be laid off just because I never know. And so, how do you provide that psychological safety and get people to buy in to change? And it's a really tough nut to crack.
Yeah. So I want to throw that back to you. How do you try to solve for that? Have you developed any best practices as a professional in that space around, kind of learning the nuance of communication, or any other methodologies that you can share with us?
Yeah, well, really what I just, kind of what I was alluding to earlier, storytelling, really bringing it home, teaching real stories as well is something that I like to do a lot. Is find people who've already done it, who are living their best life now, and we can show the story. Look, this person looks just like you, does the same thing you do. Because Christina saying it doesn't mean anything, because Christina has her little cushy corporate job. She gets to work from home whenever she feels like it. It doesn't mean anything. If the CEO says it, it doesn't mean anything. He, flies in the corporate jet. So I need, Susie Q, who's also working, in the warehouse, to say it and to hear that story and really make it human, and repeat it. Susie's story, Joe's story, Johnny's story, and on video and in paper and mailed to me. And I mean, really a lot of those same elements that people who do change management and communications know, which is repetition and storytelling and making things, pulling that empathetic, that part of the heart, the heartstrings. I think all those pieces really help get that buy-in.
And you said something else in there too, which is to have, if I understood you correctly, to have men and women from the field actually be the communicators of those
Correct.
stories. Did I understand you right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
using our own people to communicate the stories to their peers, I think is very powerful.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. And that's a great example of a best practice. And I've seen that played out in several pretty big initiatives where, a group of champions has been assembled from the field and really brought on to the change team to help facilitate that communication. And I definitely think that that's, a best practice. And really just, you're also, just building the change. I've heard different expressions for this, but the change champion network, whatever term you may use to describe that. But just building that network of folks who are definitely in the know, who understand and have embraced the idea of this change, and allow them to be, the propagators of some of that news to their colleagues out in the field
Yeah.
is a great idea.
We often use ambassadors.
Yeah.
And yeah, we absolutely use that for multiple reasons. I mean, we're so large and matrix that, I mean, it helps to have more hands on the ground. But also, again, that real life story of somebody at your same level, in your same role, in your same function, is much more impactful, and also, helps build the credibility.
Yeah. Do you think that there are different change management strategies and tactics that should be used for men and women on the front line versus other, maybe more traditional corporate jobs?
Hmm, that's a good question, because I mean, having, like, for example, ambassador or change networks, is really, we've used for both. Communications obviously is used for both. Managing stakeholders and all those things you use for both. I'm trying to think about what I would do differently. The things that the way you communicate is different.
So maybe this, you would say the strategy is the same, but the tactics that you would employ might be a little bit different for each of those
Yeah,
work groups.
yeah, the
I don't want to
tactic.
put words in your mouth, but
Absolutely. No, no, you are translating well, Christina's
yeah,
shorthand here. But yeah, absolutely. The tactics I think are different, and potentially the the execution of those tactics too. Like, if we're texting, for example, our sales force, because they all have devices, let's text. We may do a little more repetition in that modality than if we're emailing corporate. So I think there's a little bit of nuance to it, but I'm not sure like the overall strategies are that different.
Yeah, no, that actually makes perfect sense. And I think you just led to another thing that I want to talk about with you, which is the technologies that you may use or favor for implementing change with the frontline workers. So I'm not referring to the actual enterprise system that you're deploying or adapting, to change, but the actual tools that you use in the change. So you mentioned text messaging. Are you meaning literally a text sent to their smartphone as a way to communicate about that? And if so, are you using any special technologies in order to support that?
Um, I am not, but we've definitely texted messages
Yeah.
to certain parts of our workforce. We also have control of company devices. And so we can control kind of what pops up on the front, like when you
Yeah.
first log in or when you first ever. So there's some of that that we can do. Um, so technologically, those are kind of there's certain limitations, I think. We've also there's been a few creative things we've done with our frontline um, access points. So like when you think about a warehouse and there's actually a physical screen
Hmm.
uh, where there'll be a pop-up for certain um, initiatives. And you would have never thought of those in the past because you're very focused on delivering. But like little by little, we can sneak things in with IT to get some of those things in there of like, oh, hey, it's open enrollment time, or or so, when it's a really big thing like that, there can be something that impacts the workforce. But we're really back to, and it may just be a symptom of where our organization is. We're not, my experience currently is I'm not Google. And so we're very much, paper posters,
Yeah.
kind of company. And so we've got trucks, we've got drivers, we make, move, sell, so those are the types of places, we've got digital screens and tables for where people go eat lunch. And so that's how we get to in front of them.
In some ways, the old approaches have persisted and may continue to persist for some time. There's still a place for those mediums for sure. I want to go back to something that you talked about at the beginning, which was the pandemic. We can't ignore the pandemic. And I think the frontline workforce is of particular interest around this conversation because while it has affected, every human on earth, it's had a really interesting impact, I think, on frontline workers in particular, because unlike those of us with, corporate jobs that work in an office and maybe we got to work from our kitchen table for, several months or a year or two now, the frontline workers didn't get to change as much. What do you think has been the impact to the men and women on the front lines, and how is that affecting the way that you look at implementing change in that workforce?
I think we haven't even begun to understand the impact of that workforce of the pandemic on that workforce. Um, I think that sometimes people talk about the impact that this past year and a half has had on them and how exhausted they are or this or that, and then they have a conversation with a nurse or a firefighter or somebody, and then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, my life is not so bad. Like they realize what it really is like to somebody who's been on the front lines the whole time. um and so I don't think we know how. I think we're, the workforce is still, it's such a weird place. I have this conversation almost every day with someone of, like the need for more labor and how we, like we're just in this crazy labor market right now that I think that sorry, my daughter keeps FaceTiming me. Um
No problem.
I think so that's why I keep getting distracted. I think that some of them made decisions to be like, well, I need to change what I'm doing. I think some of them, are perfectly happy. They love their jobs, they were fine, they dealt with it, they've moved on, whatever. And I think we've lost a lot of people out of the workforce. And so I think that we're trying to figure out what to do. How do we get people back in the workforce? How do we change work if we need to make maybe frontline more attractive, less
Yeah.
less whatever it was this past year.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I guess I love about, I don't want to say I love about the pandemic, but maybe as a silver lining of the pandemic, is that I think there's been an increased awareness of the role that frontline workers play in the global economy, and frankly, just for all of us in our lives. And I often refer to, the whole thing when toilet paper was no longer on the shelves, and suddenly we said, who's supposed to make all the toilet paper and deliver that stuff to the grocery store, right? And I know that because I, kind of think about things in supply chain and distribution networks and stuff like that. But a lot of people hadn't really given that much thought prior to what happened, and there was a lot of pressure on those men and women that had to make that product and deliver that product, and ensure that that product was merchandised properly. And so I think one silver lining is that at least many more people now understand the role that a lot of the men and women in organizations like yours play in just the basic things that we all take for granted in our lives. So I'm optimistic about that, and I hope that helps to reshape how we think about this stuff. But I also think it's put a lot of pressure on them to the point, and I think this is what you're making about some of the labor challenges where there's been so much pressure that some people have chosen to exit jobs for a variety of reasons: better opportunity, too much pressure, lack of satisfaction, whatever that reason may be. And what I'm seeing as I have these conversations is that that's putting a lot of pressure on these organizations now to rethink, the hiring processes and training processes. The whole onboarding process now is going from something that, like we have to do this all the time, to no, we're going to replace 50% of our workforce in the next year. It's gone from, this isn't just a little side thing. This is now a main primary function for us. And I'm still, I love the point that you made. We probably haven't even seen the full impact of this yet. In fact, we almost certainly haven't. So what are some of the changes that are coming around the pipe, around the corner that we'll have to deal with?
Yeah, that's a really good point though, you made about the supply chain and people appreciating that. Because I've had conversations with friends that are not even anywhere in some sort of manufacturing industry, and they're like, well, the supply chain and the ships and can't even get in the harbors. And it's so fascinating now that people understand so much more about supply chain that they would have never thought about. Like, people ask me, where do y'all buy the corn from or the oil from? And I'm like, wow, you care about like the entire supply chain now. Like, there's so you would have never thought about. Where does where do they get the paper for the toilet paper? The trees, where do the trees come from? I don't know. Like, I just need toilet paper when I go to the grocery store. Yeah. So yeah, it is really, it isn't, like I said, a super interesting time to watch the labor market.
Some companies that we've talked to on the podcast have said that not only have the frontline workers had to kind of keep on trucking, literally and figuratively, during the pandemic, but that also their employers were trying to push more change down to the front line through necessity, trying to improve communication tools and things like that. Have you seen any of that happen over the last year and a half, where the amount of change has actually increased in part because of the pandemic, and now they're having to deal with all of that at the same time?
Yes and no. So I think there's a healthy, more than healthy level of change always happening with our groups. And I think that our teams, our leaders have been super sensitive to the fact that there is a lot going on with everyone. And so where can we buffer and maybe not push this, or slow certain things down, or combine? Hey, if we're going to change this tool this month and that tool next month, could we put them together and wait? Just, halfway logical thinking. Whereas historically we'd put one and then the next week another one and the next week another one. Now we're trying to be a little bit more sympathetic to the situation and maybe bundle things or hold off when it's busy season or things like that, which to me is like you said, another not good, but good thing out of the pandemic is like just more strategic, employee focused thinking.
Yeah, and that I've really enjoyed the change management series that we're doing on the podcast, in part because of hearing examples like what you're talking about. And I think I've come to learn this term of change saturation, which is what you were just describing without necessarily using that term. And I think it's fantastic that leadership in many organizations now are more sensitive to that. And one of our podcast guests even expanded that thought to include change outside of work. So I think I've even been narrow-minded in thinking that, we're just measuring change in the context of work. But many people have significant burdens of change right now occurring inside their lives that have nothing to do with work, but still have to be contemplated when we think about the human element, at the center of all this.
Absolutely. There's change I think there's more change a lot of times outside of work than inside of work.
Yeah.
And when we are considering work or change programs within the workforce, we have to take into account the whole human. And those are things that we maybe didn't historically do. And so I think that is really making our CHRO always says, bring the human back to human resources, and I think that's a great thing because we have to think about the humans, not just, the cog.
No, that's a really great point. And that is really at the center of what Frontline Innovators is all about, is that, many of us have spent our entire careers building and deploying technology into, the frontline worker community. And there's really not been enough attention paid to the most critical element of that transformation, which is the human that has to use the technology.
Yeah.
And, as I've just really thought back to many of the projects that I've worked on over the years with many large corporations that have spent countless months evaluating, details about the technology down to a level of, minutia that just didn't really make sense, and then paid very little attention to how the humans were actually going to adopt and engage and be successful with the technology. And so I do see us turning the corner a bit. I think just the sheer number of change management professionals that exist now inside the global economy, I think is a sign that having a strategy around change is now becoming more accepted. But that actually leads me to another question for you is, do you feel that you as a change professional have to evangelize the need for change? Or do you feel like it's very well embraced? I think I'm picking up some signs from the things that you've said that it's well embraced inside your organization. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's well embraced in pockets.
Okay.
I think that when there is a leader who has seen a really robust change program executed well, they are advocates of doing that consistently. I think that when you have leaders who haven't done it and they've executed the old way, oh, just turn it on, they'll use it. They continue to do that. And so then, like you said, you have to evangelize. No, let's look at how this other team did this. Look at how much better, look at the stats, how much more uptake they had, how quicker to, full, productivity they had, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot more sale in getting there before, you actually can get them on board. But I think to your point that there's a lot more, I think, buy-in now. But I think it's the buy-in of a little bit of it. So I don't think there's buy-in in like the entire, let's do like, oh, we can skip stakeholder analysis. We're all on board. We're good. Or you can skip, a weekly ship updating us. We're good. Like there's pieces in there. And it's like, no, this whole thing is actually really important. All the parts play with each other. And if you don't do the whole project right, then that's when something breaks.
I talked to an organization the other day, sort of similar in their model to you, not a competitor of yours, but just similar business, food and beverage distribution. And we were talking about the management, the field level management of the delivery drivers. And we were talking about skill development for them. And this company reminded me that those people are back in trucks right now. Like they're running routes. because the turnover topic that we talked about before is become such a critical issue for them that it's becoming very difficult for supervisor and manager level folks to really spend much time being supervisors and managers, because in many cases they're actually running routes, right, to keep food on the shelves and toilet paper on the shelves and all the other things that we talked about. And that's really, that's going to have some downstream effects, right? Because right now we're just trying to keep the lights on, keep things moving. And from a development standpoint, we'll probably be, a little bit delayed on that as we kind of weather the storm on this, the labor challenges that we're seeing today.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's part of the, we haven't seen all the repercussions yet, because there are so many groups that are like that, where the supervisors, the managers, the directors, the senior directors are out there doing the job of their people because they're so low on people. The VP of finance is building the spreadsheet because he doesn't have enough analysts or whatever it is. And so then they don't have enough time to have a development discussion. They don't have enough time to go to a conference or to train somebody or to whatever it is. So that repercussion, it's not just in the front line. It will be much harder in the front line, but it's going to be a global, the things that we've talked about that are impacting our labor market are going to they're just, the ripple effect is going to be huge.
Yeah. I guess that'll give us a lot of things to talk about on our Frontline Innovators.
It will. You're not going to lose topics for years.
Yeah. I guess that's good and bad, but from the podcast standpoint, we'll have plenty of things to keep talking about.
You will.
I mean, we've already blown through a lot of time. This conversation is going really, really fast. I am curious to get your take on what is your favorite thing about working around technology?
I love when something makes my life easier. Yeah, I love making other people's lives easier. So I'm really service oriented. And so teaching other people, I taught somebody how to open a SharePoint site, a SharePoint document in the app today from a vendor. Like they were sharing their screen or something. And I was like, if you push this button, you can actually open it in the app. And then there's all the features of Word or whatever. And they're like, what? And I was like, see, life is so much easier when you know all the things and the technology. And it's just, there's a billion features and you can't always know them all. And so I love that. I love discovering and learning things that make my life and other people's lives easier.
That's such a core of digital transformation initiatives and the human element. And, when we think about engagement with technology, just because somebody's using it every day doesn't mean that they're using it correctly or efficiently or effectively. And that's, what you just described is an example of that. And I think a lot of times, when you go back to what you said before about in some pockets where you don't always feel like you get the support for change management as a strategic function as much as you think you should, that's part of the problem, I think, is that people who may be pushing back say, oh no, they're using it already. They're going to know how to use it. They used the last application with no problem. They'll be able to use this application. But the reality is what we hear in every single one of those cases is that downstream, there are implications to impartial use or partial use of the application, right? Incorrect use or partial use of the application. And so there are downstream implications to that. And, but I think sometimes they're just hidden inside, big organizations where perhaps, the effects of that aren't necessarily always measured.
Absolutely. If it's not in my KPIs, if I'm not paid on it, I don't need to do it. Or my boss said I just have to log in once a month. So I just go log in once and then I leave.
And then it's done.
And that's it. And it's like, well, that's not beneficial. That's not actually what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So what's an example of something that you don't like as much about working around technology?
I think that I don't like that I can't get away from it. I don't like that. I think I'd say I don't like that I can't get away from it. And I don't like that I can't change everything I want to. I want to be in charge of the world. I want to be queen of the world. And we use, I have a lot of SaaS. I'm working on implementing a couple of SaaS providers right now. And so I'm like, why can't I do this? I should be able to do that. I want to do
Yeah.
this, if I was queen of the world, this would happen. And so I think we have to embrace like the Apple mentality. My phone works. Like, it's awesome. It does 95% of what I need it to. Yeah, it would be nice if, but whatever.
Yeah, that is part of, those of us that are kind of enthusiasts around technology and enjoy a lot of the things that come from it. It is easy to also then get frustrated that we can't even do more and faster. And I would say, especially inside an enterprise environment where we know that more is possible. It's not a technology limitation. It's rarely a technology limitation, but just getting things pushed through the process, right? Implementing the change, right? Going through that whole exercise sometimes, slows things down dramatically. And so I think that's one of the things that we've all seen, whereas, advances, even things like IoT, the adoption of certain technologies have happened faster in our homes than they've happened, in large enterprise environments, because the burden of change is just a little bit easier in a household than it is inside a large multinational corporation.
It totally is. And especially inside an inherently non-digital environment. I think
Right.
you look at like, people compare to Google or to Amazon, and I'm like, those were inherently digital. You can't compare to those because they started digital
Yeah.
compared to P&G, something who's a little more, inherently not digital. And then let's see how quickly they move.
Yeah. We just about need to wrap this up, but before we go, I would like to ask you to share with us a little bit. You were the recipient of the PepsiCo 2019 Chairman Award. Tell us about that.
Well, I was not the only one, just
Okay.
for the record.
Okay. Good. No, it's good to
It
understand.
it is I'm blushing now. Yes, lots of people get it for different things, of course. Several people from each sector are nominated, and then somebody, groups win it. So I got this with a group. So some people get it individually, some people get it with
Okay.
a team. So me and I think, of my colleagues, 4 or 5 of my colleagues got it for implementing what we call the PepsiCo way. It's our behaviors of basically how you're expected to work at PepsiCo. So when we got our new CEO, he rolled out a new mission, vision, and you would say values, but they're not values, they're behaviors. So it's our new value system, basically. And our team was dubbed internal consultants to roll it out across the entire organization. And so we had less than a month to launch it before a town hall, and had to do a bunch of work really fast, really crazy. And then that whole year, basically, we spent rolling it out across the organization.
Oh, that's a great story. Well, congratulations for that.
Thanks. It was really fun.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate you being a part of this. And we do need to wrap it up. So I hope everybody in the audience found this conversation as enjoyable as I have. And if so, please share and rate the podcast. 5-star ratings help ensure that it gets promoted to other professionals like you that are innovating on the front lines. This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, the mobile digital adoption platform for deskless and frontline workers. Visit the website at skillful.com. That's SKYLLFUL.com. And if you or someone you know is out there innovating on the front lines, we'd love to hear about it. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn and share your story. And we'll see you on our next episode. Thank you.